Welcome to KCRW's Behind the Screen series. I'm Elvis Mitchell, and I am thrilled to be sitting with someone. Well, if I took a moment to talk about every award he's been bestowed, we'd be out of time. So instead, I will go straight into the introduction and say I'm about to speak to writer, director, visual artist, Steve McQueen. Steve, so good to talk to you.
Hi, Elvis. How are you?
Better now. Gosh, there's so much to talk about here. I guess I would ask you
Mhm.
when you first heard the song Small Axe.
Wow, that's a good one. Uh, mm, I obviously was from the Wailers' Burning album. I can't remember when was the first time I heard it, but I just loved the lyrics. Always did. It's beautiful. It's a mantra. It's a chant. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's almost like a going into battle song. Really. Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, because just watching Mangrove, I couldn't help but think about that, especially when you introduce the policeman. Why boast of thyself, O evil men? That first line from the song just really, really hit me there. And also, you start Mangrove off with "Try Me."
With what? Try me, try me. Yeah. Try me, which is kind of like a doo-wop, because obviously the Wailers were kind of riffing off the doo-wop sort of American obviously influence on them beforehand. Yeah, I just, it's the sometimes bands sometimes could be warriors. You know what I mean? They're a group of guys and or women or mix or band, whatever, but they're a group and they got instruments and they have a message and they have an agenda and they're going to go for it until someone bloody listens. And that's why I always saw the Wailers before, of course, it became Bob Marley and the Wailers. But yeah, they were. Yeah, that's what it was. It was about that. It's carrying. It's almost like a sort of kind of Greek sort of. What can I say? It has this sort of biblical, but at the same time, timeless quality to it.
It's definitely biblical, very Old Testament, but also the Wailers in particular are just so seductive that you almost have to listen to the song twice because
Yeah,
halfway into it, you hit you. Wait, what are they saying?
exactly. We have in England that they were on this program called the Old Grey Whistle Test.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. That's the first time they appeared in that when Bob's Locks was sort of so high. Rebel music, fantastic. Yeah.
Because I remember from Old Grey Whistle Test, they insisted on playing live rather than syncing to a track.
Always,
Yeah,
always live. Yeah, always. I think that was always live there. But yeah, they were fantastic. Yeah.
because there's something about the way you use music, particularly in this, where so much of the music is like that. It has that kind of that lilting, seductive quality that unless you know the songs, it really is. It's really about walking past, almost like walking past Notting Hill.
Mm.
Um, you have to pay attention in a certain kind of way to know what it is. And that opening shot, we get to see London basically being gentrified. You come down to the street in Notting Hill. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean that was a post-war Britain. Again, it was a certain kind of, and there was a highway. There was a Westway that is cut through Ladbroke Grove, which is almost like the super highway, and it tore down a lot of housing. And of course, the debris you see is post-war Britain because London rather wasn't really built up really until sometime in the 80s. You always saw evidence of the Blitz of the Second World War of the Nazi bombardment of London. And then when the superhighway came in, the Westway, no pun intended, that's what it's called, the Westway. It just devastated a lot of local housing and whatnot. That's when squatting became very, very popular too at that time.
Yeah, because I remember going there for the first time in the 80s and that sense of London where it wasn't that tall a city. There weren't a lot of tall buildings in London. And really, to me, Notting Hill kind of felt like an epicenter of that, where it was one of the last neighborhoods to get those buildings.
Yeah, well, again, it's still a bit flat, but it's sort of again, London. I mean, London became sort of this sort of shiny glass metal space in the 2000s, in the late 90s, 2000s, really, because it wasn't like that at all. Yeah,
Because
like,
I just found myself thinking about the opening shot and the closing shot. You've got Frank on the street. and his relationship to the street, where his sense of ownership at the very beginning and the question at the very end. And it made me think that in so many of the films you've done, they're about the danger of recognizing your self-ownership, in Shame, in Hunger, in Widows, certainly 12 Years a Slave, about when you recognize who you are, you get that kind of self-awareness, how the world changes for you.
Yeah, and I think for me, I could have only made this film now. It took a while, it took 11 years or so since I initially wanted to start to do it, because also I became 50, and when you become 50, so for me at least, it was almost like I had a superpower. Oh wow, you know what I mean? It's like, I know what that feels like. Oh, I know how that's going to work out. Or you have some kind of how can I say, map of how things are, even if it hurts, you know how it's going to hurt. If it's going to end up like that, you know how to deal with it in some way. Oh, you know what's coming. So in some ways, I could only have done this film now because I had the courage to sort of, in fact, look at it. I needed the experience. I needed sort of to mature. Similar how you sort of see your parents when you're a teenager and then you see them now. And this is why, again, like you said, the ownership situation is somehow I had to sort of put the roots into the earth, so I couldn't be toppled over. That I couldn't be sort of swayed. That it was firmly in the foundations as such.
I just think it's so interesting to me because those other films, we talk about them, the ownership is subtextual, but here it's text. And it took you a while to get there. Is like you said, because you got to be, a Black man who lived to be 50 years old?
How many of us don't? How many, to be quite frank, how many of us don't? And to have that experience and to have this some kind of, I was even, when I started off, it's, I don't know, it's kind of weird that you say that because, again, I know so many people who didn't make it. So many people who didn't make it. And it's unusual, it's a high number. And it's one of those things where, I just felt, when I never forget because the Black ownership card in the window, because what was so interesting about it, because I couldn't see it in the film at first. So I put that card in there. Where's the card? I put it there for a reason. I thought, you know what? So I did a reshoot. I said, no, we're going to plant that card, boom, into the thing. So I went back to reshoot. It was the last thing actually we shot, Black ownership. So it was kind of interesting how that ties up because I put the card in the bloody window, but every time I was looking for the card in the shots, I thought, because I want it to be subliminal, but it's there, but you can see it. But I thought, no. Let's not leave anything to chance. Frank goes into the shop and boom, Black ownership,
Oh yeah, I mean that's what really hit it for me, seeing that card, because I thought about so often that thematically, even in your art, the idea of ownership, which becomes a kind of awareness about who you are, where you stand in the world, and how other people see you. Runs so often through your films, and I just wonder if this felt for you like the logical place to explore that as context rather than a thematic kind of a thing.
Context rather than thematic kind of thing. Yes, because I suppose in a way it goes back to 1968 when Frank opened his restaurant, and he opened his restaurant, and in the same year as Enoch Powell, a conservative MP, famous conservative MP, gave a speech called the Rivers of Blood speech, and what he was saying is that because of the Black immigration in the country, in the UK, that the streets will be turned into a river of blood. There'll be violence, there'll be carnage, and so forth. Because the Black man, this is his words, the Black man would have the whip hand over the white man. These were his words. So I wanted to get to a situation when we started the picture that this wasn't, I'm tired of hearing the Windrush generation. We have a thing going on called the Windrush generation. The Windrush generation, the people came over in the 50s and early 60s and so forth. But for me, this was the second phase of that. This is people who were basically planting their roots. These weren't people who just came off on board a ship and just arrived. These were people who established themselves in London and in places like Soho, and there was nightclubs, and also and elsewhere in London, who were working class guys, Black guys, who basically said, okay, right, you know what? I'm going to own my own shop. I'm not going to go to that place and pay money to get into. I'm going to make my own. So that was it. Absolutely.
And what's so fascinating here too is just to see the distaste in the cop's face for the food. I mean, when they raid the place, you can see them smell the inside of Mangrove when they go in. But I thought it interesting you let us see that too. They're almost revulsion to being inside this place that didn't smell like any place else they'd gone into before.
Absolutely. There was a serial killer in Labrador over that time in the late 50s. Can't remember the guy's. There's a very famous serial killer. And yes, and what was he? Someone will be saying, hearing us have this conversation. It's so and so. Anyway, this guy was a very famous serial killer, and he was living in Labrador. Of course, it became very much a black West Indian community as well. And basically he would put the bodies under under floorboards and stuff. And when the detectives came, because they had their lodges, black lodges upstairs, when the detectives go, "Oh, so it smells a bit funny in here," he goes, "Oh yeah, it's those foreigners. You know the way they cook." "Oh yeah." I forgot his name, but yeah, that was his cover. The food, the smelling of the food.
Oh yeah. My God. Oh my God. Oh, wow. Okay.
Someone watching it will know exactly what I'm talking about. And I imagine you guys who's watching this, you'll find out who it is. But that was one of his excuses, though, because he had West Indian lodges upstairs. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Very famous serial killer. And he put them in the walls as well. Yeah.
Wow. Because I mean, that idea, because it's so much about, and using that as another kind of smoke screen, I guess, but a kind of cultural revulsion to see the cops shudder and turn their nose as they come into this place to do something they have no business doing anyway. I mean, this invasive forces, and it really should look like we're watching colonization, the way the cops come into that place. And I wondered if that was something you were going for as well.
No, because we belong. This is our yard. This is like, it wasn't.
That's it. All the places they colonize are places we belong to.
I know, but it wasn't a case that we had equal footing, I should say. It was again, I didn't want to have a situation where there was this is our yard. This is our yard. So it's not the case of it's like when I remember, what was that? You remember that time when in the floods in New Orleans, and they were calling these people refugees? What do you mean, you refugees? We live here. We were refugees. Remember? With Bush, call them refugees. I mean, come on. So this is exactly the same thing. We live here. Get the hell out. And if you don't mind, could you just shut the door? No, there's a draft in here.
But I mean, I guess the reason I bring this up is because I always think about you. We talked about this before so many times, the way you use space. And the space inside the Mangrove is small, but it feels intimate and not claustrophobic. And the way Frank moves from inside that space into out in the street at night, and how it all feels comfortable to him. In fact, it's the place, the Mangrove and the streets are one big neighborhood to him, where there's a sense of comfort. And then you take us inside that car where that cop has his nose, he's already snarling and frowning about the smell before he goes into the restaurant and starts talking about, you have to keep the black in the place. That black doesn't know his place. I mean, there's so much textually going on there. I mean, the ease that Frank has in his neighborhood versus what these outsiders want to bring to it.
I think also the clothes. I think in his uniform, he's uncomfortable. There's a certain, his starched shirt, his very kind of buttoned up jacket. He's top buttoned down with a tie. There's always an uncomfortability. He's never relaxed. That's Frank Pulley, who is his nemesis. And I think with Frank, I think there was a huge jealousy between Frank, the two Franks.
Sure, yeah.
Pulley. There was a huge jealousy because and it's kind of cliche to say, but it's the truth. Frank owned the streets. Pulley wanted to own the street. He didn't own the streets. And that's the situation. This is why there was a big clash between them, because also the fact of the matter is in reality is that Pulley, that's what he says. When he talks about sausage and eggs, because Frank wouldn't pay him. Frank wouldn't bend. He said to Dolly's friend. In reality, he said, if I pay them, they'll never go away. He never paid them. It's bribery, and he never bent. And he had love of the people in the street, and Pulley couldn't deal. He couldn't deal with it. That's why they raided him again and again and again.
And again, that's one of the things that you do so brilliantly here, but so often you show us, I mean, so often for you, interiors are really kind of terrifying places, you know, scary places. But you also have this thing you do. You make big cities into small cities. You do the same thing with Manhattan and Shame. You make it goes to being a big place to a smaller place. And I was thinking too about here. We start with this big shot of London. You take us inside to Notting Hill and to Frank's ease in that place. And then that great scene going from inside the restaurant to outside, you go right to a pulley in the car, and we can see him seething. Again, he's enclosed in that space. He's wearing that uniform you're talking about. He's actually in profile even, but we get a sense of his anger and his discomfort. And also he's in that little box of a car, which is the only neighborhood that he owns.
Yeah, I suppose it's about making the city inhabitable. I think, I think often, if you think, again, it's how you make it. It becomes much more of the local rather than the sprawling metropolis, and you feel that you're sort of a part of it. There's a familiarity. I think familiarity is the key in some ways, because therefore it doesn't become so sort of distant. Again, I think. When you sort of when you own the streets, or you're familiar with your streets, it's like your front room, but with people as such.
I mean, I guess, but to me, it's so often about the way you use space and negative space, and I wonder if that's one of the reasons that you love film so much, is because it gives you a chance to use space in a way that we don't often see directors use it. I mean, the fact that you take us inside. You often walk us inside to a room. There's a very specific reason for us to see how these people feel in their spaces. So often in Shame, it's a really comfortable, rather a cold and modern place he lives in, and it's kind of big. But here I'm just thinking about how Frank's world is very close around, and he can almost touch the walls, but there's that warm sepia light inside that place. I mean, it's inviting to us.
It's very, if I could be bold and say, it's a very black space in that sense. And I mean by that, as far as when I grew up, these were the spaces that were given to us, and we okay, this is it. Okay, we'll make something out of it. Anything you throw, okay, this is it. Okay, let's put the carpet over here, put this over there, put this there, and then you make something out of it. There's nothing which was seen uninhabitable, and I think that was it. The downstairs, the basement became the kitchen. In fact, the basement then became the center of the Mangrove. As far as the gambling thing is concerned, and so forth and whatnot. I think those are that's part of the small acts thing in a way. There's nothing. How can I say? There's not, and also again, this about space, the Old Bailey, of course, because we go from this hole in the wall, and to the highest court in the land, the Old Bailey. And I think a lot of things that we did in the Old Bailey, I think people, again, it was how do you. That space was a very interesting space, the Old Bailey, and how do you? Because it's the institution of justice as such, the establishment institution of justice, whatever that means, and how do you bring that sort of overt sort of how can I say I would say hierarchy, entitlement, whatever you want to call it,
oppression. It's an oppressive space.
Precisely. Into these people. So that's it. And how did they win it back? And they win it back. You know how they win it back? Because they turned the courtroom into a church. That's what they do. They turn it into the pulpit. There's a congregation. They turn it. They twist it slowly but surely. It becomes a church.
But it's also too about how they bridge the distance by being on the witness stand and speaking to the stand. Rather speaking to the people in the room, speaking to the audience. In effect, I mean, the fact is, it's about that black space is about constant communication.
Yes,
isn't it?
Totally. And also, you turning the cinema into church, because that's the audience. When you get Frank Critchlow, when you get Darkus preaching, you're expanding. I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, but you're expanding the space. Again, I don't know if I've asked you correctly, because by turning the courtroom into a church, because it is, but then you're turning the auditorium it's a wider situation. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
no, it does, because it goes from being a gallery to a pulpit, and we're congregants, And it's about filling the space with feeling, with heart, with people who talk, and moving it out of that sort of traditional, you speak when I tell you to speak. Nobody waits and in fact, they take over the courtroom. I mean, in a really interesting, subtle way, you show us how the Mangrove Nine bend the jurors to their will because they turn it into the space in which they inhabit.
I love what you just said, the feeling and heart. That was beautiful. I think that's exactly it. They turn it into feeling, and this is real. This is and justice, and what bringing. Okay, let's bring justice into the courtroom. This is apparently a house of justice. Okay, let's bring justice. Let's bring justice. What is justice? And then there you have it. We critique it, we talk about it, we discuss it, and let's talk about justice. And as you said, they turn the jury to their whim. To the point where the jury come back and celebrate with them in the Mangrove. Yeah, they come for a slice of cake and a cup of tea after church.
Which is my favorite moment, because that really just kind of shows how there's certainly a kind of a legal strategy, but then for the Mangrove Nine, it becomes an emotional strategy. It's Doc is saying, you have to let me speak. You have to let me, and by showing the spillover from the personal lives into the courtroom, which is something we don't often see in these kinds of movies. And there's always this kind of weird separation where it's people who walk into the courtroom and that's it. And by taking the time to show us that overlap, that overflow, that they are not just people on trial, they're not just defendants, they're people bringing their own histories and their own world into that courtroom, which I thought was the most incredible thing. Because there's one thing that struck me. I have to ask you about this. Did I see a picture of Jean-Jacques Dessalines in one of the
Yes.
I thought I did. Tell me about. That's a really interesting choice to make, because he's an early freedom fighter. Let's not talk about. Okay, that's okay. I wanted to make sure I saw what I thought I saw. That wasn't hallucinating there. But I think. But again, that idea of taking this space that is yours, and bringing and saying the movie in effect is about wherever these people go is home to them, because if you're a nation of immigrants, you have to make a place that may be hospitable for yourself, and that becomes a courtroom too at the end, doesn't it?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, it goes back to that point when I said, okay, this is what we got. Okay, well, let's put this over there. We make it ours. And again, it's the power of the will. You think your will is stronger than mine? Let's see. Let's see if your will is stronger than mine. I left my family, I left my people behind to come all the way here. And also how I got here anyway in the first place. So again, it's never a level playing pitch, and we know that. But at the same time, we always aim to win. We don't have a choice. And I think because of how far some people have come, it's how much they're willing to risk. And when people see that, then it is what it is.
I don't know, because it's more than what it is. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you there, just because you, as an artist, as a filmmaker, have I think an emotional understanding of what territory is, both emotional and literal. And so often in your work, people are fighting for a piece of space around them, be it physical space or emotional space. And that's the other thing that sort of comes to mind too. This ownership expands to the idea of, how do I own this place that's around us? And it's really, to me, kind of epitomized the moment where Frank has to decide where he's going to be. Is he going to remain a part of them? It's being, the system is trying to tear him apart from his ad hoc family. And what's he going to do? And that's the real suspense, not the outcome, because I knew what the verdict was, but that moment. And I feel like that was a conscious thing for you to do too, wasn't it? To make it about that rather than the actual decision.
That is the premise in some ways, because Frank he's this ordinary guy that becomes extraordinary. He's unaware of how much influence he has in the community, and all of a sudden he's been told he knows to some extent, but he's not an intellectual. He's not an
activist.
No, he was a facilitator. He wants people to come into the cafe and to enjoy themselves and to sort of a home away from home. And then people come and talk, whatever. He loves it. But all of a sudden, you have to decide, Frank, you have to decide where you want to go. What is going on here. You can live a nice life and have your cafe and whatnot. And as these lawyers said, these agitators came in and took over your cafe, but you must be guilty. And the temptation of that was strong, because I remember that this story was told to me firsthand by Anthony Jones LeQuant. And yeah, because it was firsthand, because all the stuff with the baby, all that speech, it's never been written down. She told me firsthand what happened. And the reaction, and she overheard this guy saying, well, that's the scene. That's why I wrote the scene as the scene. So, it was real. It was real. And she had my unborn child. And that was, for me, that was, the future. My films, if I could say anything, are science fiction movies, if I could say that. And what I mean by that, it tells us where we are, how far we've come, and where we need to go. So basically, I'm interested in where we need to go. If this is where we are right now, this is how far it took us to get here, it also tells us how far we have to go. So that's what it is. And the whole idea of the unborn child, whole idea of actually, because there are people who can go either way, and we know people who go the other way. We know those people who go the other way rather than that way. And one could say names, which I would love to say names, but that's how it is. But I will never say names. I mean, people, and the people who sort of say, okay, you know what, fuck it, let's just go. Because what you got to, after a while, what you got to lose? What have you got to lose after a while? What do you have to lose? We're all going to die anyway. Let's be frank. So what you got to lose? So after a while, how much money can you make? How many pairs of shoes can you wear? How many cars can you drive? How many houses can you live in? So, whatever.
No better time to ask that question than now. But I think you're talking about this and all these things I was alluding to and talking about thematic things that you do.
I have a very large trainer collection. Sorry.
Sorry, you do? Do you? Do you? I wouldn't know that about you, Steve.
The size of a poor upbringing.
Yes, so I guess that answers the question, how many pairs of shoes can you have? A lot! But we'll make your movie later. But when you're talking about this thing you do, we've talked about this before too, over many dinners, is there's one person who represents the past, one who represents the present, and one who represents the future. That's always in your movies. That's something you've gone back to again and again and again. And it's these fights, that fight that Frank is having is, does he want to stay in the past, which is where he's going to have to deal with Pulley? Does he want to be in the present where he has to include these people? And does he want to look out to the future where there are these children, both the infant who's in the jury room with them and Barbara's kid and the unborn child? And that to you, I almost wonder if they're like these thematic things that you sit down and you sketch out and then you figure out where they fit in with the story, because your movies are as much about characters' emotional growth as they are plot. And that's why I said that moment where Frank has to decide which side he's going to be on. It's like, well, the decision doesn't matter from the jury at that point. It's about where he's going to live, because is he going to be free or not free?
And you know what, Elvis? There was a very emotional situation after the London Film Festival when we showed Mangrove, where I met Anthea's daughter. I met the child. Wow. It was very emotional. It was very emotional. It was just beautiful to see this lady. And it was just, and she was there with a sister of hers. I thought, God, so you're the lady, you're the baby, you're the future. And she just blew in tears, and it's just beautiful. It was beautiful. I couldn't hug her because of fucking COVID-19, of course. But there you go. What is going on with human emotions? It's very bad this time, and it's heavy. It's heavy. It's heavy. It's heavy. It's heavy. It's heavy.
I think this movie has. I think the film hit me in a much different way because of COVID now, because it's about people needing to connect and stay connected, and that what I'm talking about. That's why I keep going back to it, because that really hit me in a way that it shocked me. Because there's a way where, logically, if we're watching a film about a trial, we're waiting for the verdict to be handed down. But suddenly, the verdict isn't important anymore. I mean, I'm not saying it's immaterial, but there's something that's more important to you thematically. And it's about where Frank is going to vote to be with himself, with his being, with his own future, in fact. And that's so often the crisis point for these characters you create. And I guess I wonder how far back that goes for you, because it's certainly in the very first film, it's certainly this idea of the future being something is present in in a lot of your visual art as well. I just wonder when it hit you that you're always making pieces about people reaching for the future.
Because that's who we are. I think as far as Black people is concerned, it's always about the future, because they don't want to give us a past. They don't, I don't know, you know who you are. They don't want to give us a past. The family, the past, and therefore sorry, I'm going on a bit, but
No,
they don't want to give us a past. So therefore, again, we have a past. We know about a past. And it is always, the past is our future. So I always say, and again, Bob Marley, orator, Whalers orator, if you don't know your past, you don't know your future. And that's it. So that's what I'm trying to do, if anything, I'm repeating myself, but it is that to propel oneself into future, because they don't want to, they don't think we have a future neither. So we're just hanging around until they die out, hopefully, I imagine. But no, they don't want like that. So one has to, that's why I talked about in the beginning about the roots and planting the roots, planting them deep in the ground so the ground so you can't be toppled or pushed over. But then from that sprouts, fruit, sprouts leaves, sprouts whatever, and what you make with those fruits, it's a future. Move it on, move the narrative on. It's very important, I think, again, and it's not just about sci-fi and that palaver. It's just about, it's just about what is a future, and what does it look like, and what does it smell like, what does it taste like, what does it sound like, and that's what we do with music. That's what we do with food. That's what we do with everything. Sensuality, sexuality. I mean, it's all about that.
But I mean, to revisit this though, I mean, so often, in fact, not so often, basically in every movie you made, the protagonist is living specifically in the present. They can't see the future and they don't want to acknowledge the past. You go back to that kind of character.
Very good. Sorry. I said very good. I apologize. You just hit my yes. I mean, I'm sorry. It sounds weird. It's great. That's fantastic. I mean, wow.
Well, we've known each other for a while, and you know how much regard I have for you. And as I spend a lot of time thinking about your work and rewatched everything after I watched Mangrove, just to remind myself of where all these people live, and I just really was hit by that. And that's why I keep going back to that moment with Frank, which is really the climax of the movie. Everything else is departed, literally by the end of the movie. But that idea of somebody who can't get out of their own, who's obsessed with the tactile, this thing you're talking about, wanting to touch and love the things that are around them right now, because to me that becomes a de facto way of dealing with the Black experience, be it in shame or hunger or literally in Widows and Here and 12 Years a Slave. It's always there, that idea of we have to live in the present because do we have a future? That's so key to what you do as a creator, isn't it?
Wow, I'm learning. I love what you said about people to try to forget their past, and you're quite right. If it's Bobby Sands, if it's Brandon in Shame, 12 Years a Slave. I mean, even to a certain extent, Solomon tries to forget his past because he wants to just survive. He thinks if I forget my past and I don't, the weight was not on my chest, I can move on. Just forget my past. Same thing about obviously Widows with
Veronica. Absolutely.
So bloody hell, flipping heck. Yes, I think that is a bit of it. Yes, I mean, yeah, because if I have to, and I think again, yes, you're quite right about me personally. I think it's about reinvention often. I think reinvention. To reinvent yourself, because the past is so traumatic often for Black people, often so traumatic that you try to reinvent yourself. I was looking at this wonderful documentary on Duke Ellington the other day, calls himself Duke. You know what I mean? It's like,
yes.
I'm this, and you can do that. and you can live up to it as well. So to sort of not say it's just that you have to leave it. So in order to move forward, sometimes you sort of imagine block out the past, but it bites you in the ass in the end. And I think that's what happened to me with Mangrove. Actually, you hit on something because, or a small act. I had to come back 11 years. I had to go back in order to go forward. Now, I had to go back right now. This is my moment to go back. I had to go back in a way. What am I saying? I had to remember the past. Literally,
Sure.
in film.
But
there's a beautiful Sade lyric from Widows, from the Big Unknown, and this lyric, she says, "I had to go back to save me from the wreck. I know it's not over yet." And I was like, damn! I was like, so listen, she could have surfaced. She could have surfaced. She could have said, but she said, no, I have to go back and save myself, save my soul, save whoever I am, So that's incredible. So I think, yeah, it's trauma, and whatever kind of trauma we have, because too much trauma about people, too much trauma, and we put one foot in front of the other each day to get to A to B. But that's what we have to do because we have no choice. But we have to look at it. Yeah,
which in effect makes.
Oh, this is so heavy.
We haven't talked for a while. I got to make up for lost time. Because what we're talking about too is in effect that if you describe Black lives, people.
Whoa. This is interesting, and also don't forget the last thing they shot, what we just talked about, was Black ownership. That was the last thing. So I had to go back because I wanted it to be, but it wasn't popping. I said, no. Boom. So interesting to go back, to forget, and then to put it. I didn't forget, but it wasn't there, so I had to go back. Literally had to go back just to put that in, to put it in the front.
Yeah, the circle. I mean, I think, but it's just so much for you to talk about, and there's always just like this with you, because in the abstract, Black existence sounds like science fiction anyway.
Whoa. They wouldn't believe you. You tell an alien? They go, what? No.
And it's
they're still walking and talking? And they got ideas? Nah.
People were saying that in the movie though. And there's another line that comes up during the trial that I thought was really kind of, you must have chuckled as writing this. We mustn't be victims, but protagonists of our own stories.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, of course. I mean, that's also the way to the future. Because she, as being a mom carrying an unborn child, she has to think about the future. That's also the difference between women and men too, isn't it?
Sure. That was onto the Quant's actual words. I think it's self-explanatory. I can't really add to that. Yeah.
I mean, in coming back to it after this interregnum, did you find the material like richer than you remember it being because it was always in the back of your head, or were you always thinking about an attack, an approach for it, and you just got a chance to use it when you got a chance to make Mangrove?
Way richer because I never thought about it. I didn't really want to think about it.
Yeah,
that's kind of weird. This is you shook me with that thing because I didn't really want to think about it because I had to go back and get it. Obviously, like I said, I don't mean to sort of to go back to what you said, but it actually is because it was uncomfortable. It was and then when I went back and I looked at it and said, okay, wow, this is this and this is that. But it was one of those things where again, like I said, I had to mature. I had to sort of get some sort of distance before I could face it for some reason. I don't, why. It's so very close. It's very close. Very close.
I don't know, because I feel like in some ways Frank is you. And no, you think about this sort of what you had as a younger filmmaker is this unbridled ambition and a sense of what you wanted, and you were living in the present. And that's why the scenes that really have the biggest impact in your movies are the scenes where these characters are shaken out of living in the present. But to fill the movie up in the way you did, because there are a lot of people in this movie. There are a lot of people, like more, I think, than any movie you've ever done before. And you have to identify them all very specifically. So we know who's talking, when they're talking, what they're talking about. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes on there to be able to deliver a character in some cases, just a couple of lines. And I have to say I was thrilled when I saw Darkest Hour on this. I was like, oh my God, somebody I know at least. But I think that part of it too was just you being able to fill this thing up in the way you needed to. And you had to arrive where you are now to be able to give all those characters their due.
Well, yeah, it was, again, Alistair Sims was the co-writer on it, and we just sort of got, I mean, Alistair was very much on the trial. I mean, there wasn't any transcripts at that time, would you believe? It was the year after they started to transcript all of the trial.
Really? Oh my God.
Alistair found this, I think, in this newspaper, the journalist who went there every day, I think the Kensington Gazette. So that's how we get all the details, because some journalist was writing everything that was being said. It was only the year after they started to transcript all the trials, yes. So that's how we got all the documentation from this journalist who went in there every day for, oh my God, how long was it? It was like a 90 days.
11 weeks, right?
Yeah, 11 weeks, sorry, to sort of write this thing up.
Oh, sure.
And then from there, and from there, we sort of spoke. We obviously the interviews. Our researcher Helen Bart was incredible, and getting us access to people like Anthony Jones LeQuant, and then she spoke to Helen, spoke to Barbara Beese, and others, and also just the friends, because all the men, all the men are dead, all the black men, all the men are dead, all of them are dead, apart from the two women who remain, Barbara Beese and Anthony Jones LeQuant. So it was a case of, and also, what's so funny? Elvis, this is what I'm trying to say about, this is beautiful what you just said about the whole idea of, you said, what did you say? What was it? It's not forgetting. It was about, it was about forgetting. Wasn't it what you said? The main genius thing you said. And what it is, what's interesting? Rothwell Kentish was one of my father's best friends. Okay, he's one of the Mangrove Nine. He's the guy, the China man. He's almost like the guy who was like, was like the fourth lead in there. Rothwell Kentish. So he's the guy who says, when Frank goes, it's them, it's them, and it's we and them. Whatever.
We and them, yeah. It's
so
not
Rothwell Kentish, he opened a place called Backyard. Okay, and that was the sort of a club there. But then he turned it into the Black People's Information Center. The Black People Information Center was where the Black Panthers you saw met up, and that was his place. The Black people, where they get information, housing, and so forth and whatnot. So that was one of my dad's best friends. In fact, they grew up in a place called Paradise together in Grenada. So when I was lying on the floor watching TV with propping up my head with my hand, he and my father used to talk. But up until 10, 15 years ago, I never knew that Rothwell Kentish was one of the Mangrove Nine. Never knew.
Oh my gosh.
People didn't talk. People didn't talk. He was one of my dad's best friends. People didn't talk. And it's the PS, it's the post-distress, it's the PST, the post-distress stress disorder.
PTSD?
Sorry, I'm stripping off my words.
A post-traumatic stress disorder.
Post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what happened, because no one, how did I not know that, Elvis? Because people didn't want to, like you said rightly, you hit the nail bang on the head. People didn't want to remember because it was that traumatic. We're celebrating them now, 50 years after the event, and they like I said, like my father and others lived and died, and didn't have the chance to be celebrated, or didn't in the way that they should have, or be recognized in the way they should have been recognized. And yeah, so that was weird. That was yeah. People didn't talk. And then again, in the West Indian household, it was like a Victorian household, shouldn't be seen and not heard. So we heard snippets because people didn't talk. We heard little things about who was this and who married to who and who's with who and whose child is that and whatever. But same thing with Major. Yeah, but it was interesting that it was so traumatic. And don't forget, there was a gentleman. This is heavy, and I remember this guy's name. This is so traumatic. There was a guy. Excuse me. I'm just get his information. Forget people's names. So many names, as you said. I think yes, it was. Sorry, it was. Yeah. Rothwell Kentish. Rothwell Kentish. It was Roden Gordon was my father's friend. Rothwell Kentish. Forgive me, I'm just going crazy with names. The day after the trial, he got his arm broken and his leg broken, and he got put in jail for 36 months for a trumped up charge about sort of offensive weapon the day after the trial. So the police were on them day after the trial. And don't forget, these victories, as we see in this movie, this was an exception to the rule, as we know. And the only reason that we look at this in this way is because they were tried in the high court. So there's nowhere else to go. If it was just justice for justice sake, no one, they still wouldn't be believed. But because it was a white establishment that said, hey, guess what? You're not guilty, then you're not guilty.
I mean, that's what makes it feel like science fiction, too, that there are black people in the Bailey in the 70s. And wait, what? How did this happen?
Defending themselves, yeah.
Yes, because that's what brought to attention. You go, wait, how did that happen? What? Oh, this is for real now. But I would also say this to you, too, that this is part of that generation where they didn't self-mythologize. They did something, and now what's next? I mean, that's a generation.
I understand not whatever you said, excuse me, can't even speak English anymore. Self-praise, whatever it was. I understand that, but the fact of the matter is that the recognition that they, again, it's painful. Damn, people lived and died. People lived and died. People lived and died. And I think that, again, no one's asking to have the ticker tape parade. Not at all. But, people didn't really knew who they were up until a certain point. That's all. No,
it's not that. There's all, because that gets me back again to the last scene in the movie. Go ahead. Sorry.
Recognition is important, Elvis. It's important. It's important.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying these are not the kind of people who would beat the drums for themselves. I'm not saying they didn't deserve recognition.
Well, that's why we're here. That's why we're here.
And it's probably a great place to end. Otherwise, we'll be here for the rest of the day. Let me thank
Oh my God! I'm sorry I spoke over you so often towards the end. I apologize. Just getting too.
No, you have nothing to apologize. Nobody.
What you were saying about the forgetting thing, or not even forgetting the. Actually, it's not even forgetting. It's actually a conscious decision to not open that box. Interesting. Okay, I'll shut up now.
No, please don't. It's just I'm only saying this because we're out of time. Otherwise, we'll be here for the rest of the day, and I know you have things to do. And let me say, I miss you. It's been too long. And let me thank my friend Steve McQueen for his time and for his movie Mangrove. And thank you all for watching Behind the Screens. We'll see you next time.
Beautiful. Thank you, Elvis. Cool. Blind, have a drink now. Or two.